Hello there, I am the Donberry. Today we are going to be discussing the deeply beloved classic Resident Evil 2. Released in 1998 for the PlayStation by Capcom after the success of Resident Evil in 1996. Resident Evil 2 is well known and celebrated by gamers across several generations thanks to Resident Evil 2 Remake redefining survival horror for Zoomers and millennials such as myself. I realize reviewing and analyzing a game that came out in 1998 may seem strange, but in the time we live in where indie game developers are releasing some incredible love letters to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, I find it ever more interesting to analyze some of the biggest daddies in survival horror. Throughout this video, I will provide an overview of the story, the characters, the setting, and speak on anything I find relevant to the presentation, lore, and story of Resident Evil 2. I will give a critique of the gameplay overall. This section will cover everything from combat, exploration, puzzles, reading files, and whatever else I can take note of. Although story is extremely important, I do think it's equally important for a video game to be fun or enjoyable in some way. I've noticed the more I enjoy playing a video game, that is, the more fun I'm having, the more interested I tend to be in the story. This video will be divided into three main sections: story, presentation, and gameplay. Feel free to skip around to whatever section most interests you. Finally, there will certainly be major and minor spoilers in this video. Even though this game came out almost 3 decades ago, I'd still like to warn you. Let's begin, shall we? Okay, so before we begin this section of the video, I just want to provide a little backdrop for Resident Evil. I want to talk about the setting a little bit, maybe talk about T-Virus, maybe a little Umbrella, you know, the heavy hitters in this setting. So, what we have in Resident Evil is primarily a story of, I don't know. There are many words I could attach to the story of Resident Evil. Corruption, corporate greed, the possible dangers of science. But for Resident Evil 2, the subjects that are most readily apparent to me are corruption of police authority, the idea of being married to your work, for better or for worse, and the contrast between big corporations and the individual. Throughout Resident Evil 2, we are confronted with several characters from our 2 stars of the show, Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy, who seem to be mostly good people, and people whose actions are either completely irredeemable or somewhat mysterious. It seems most natural for us to start with the characters. Leon Kennedy. Leon, who is an idealist, a white knight kind of guy, has genuine care for his fellow man, and he is led by an admirable sense of duty to serve the people of Raccoon City. There exists a stark contrast between Leon the idealist and the corrupt RPD, in particular Chief Brian Irons, who just enables Umbrella to do their weird stuff in the RPD basement. To go a step further, the writers go above and beyond to make sure we understand that not only is Chief Irons a man who makes questionable decisions, he's also quite a sick and twisted man. From his taxidermy hobby to him ending up with the mayor of Raccoon City's dead daughter. More on Irons soon. But for Leon, most of us already know his fate. We know Ada stabs him in the back, yet we can almost understand Ada's actions in some ways because her worldview, her professionalism, and the very nature of the things she chooses to do for her line of work. We know there's simply no room for Leon's naivete in Ada's world. It should be noted that although Leon becomes a useful tool for Ada in attaining the G-Virus, it could be argued that some small part of Ada, an ancient part of her, the one not governed by her sense of cold professionalism, actually admires Leon's goodness. What else to say about Leon other than his goodness? Yes, he is a rookie cop, as most of us know. Resident Evil 2 takes place during the first night on the job. Shortly after he meets Claire, and then Marvin, depending on what scenario you're playing, and we see his eagerness to help others in his interactions with these characters. We see in Leon a man with a desire to serve the people of Raccoon City, an optimistic, virtuous quality that will be greatly contrasted with several less heroic characters in this setting. Finally, we learn that Leon, like any young man, is vulnerable to manipulation. The reason Leon is often labeled as naive is because of the ease at which Ada works him like a puppet. I don't think Leon isn't smart, but I find those morally good types of characters often project their worldview onto people they don't know. And I believe that's what happens between Leon and Ada. He wants to believe her, even though he has his doubts about her, because he wants to believe there are good people in this world. One last note on Leon, and this goes for any basic protagonist. He is no coward, and will put himself in harm's way to protect others, as we see when he takes a bullet for Ada. He is acting on his own sense of justice and morality, and he is a hero whose motivations are virtuous and appropriately lacking some wisdom. Chief Brian Irons. Chief Irons is interesting, as we receive some hints about his unusual behavior in memos we come across. Before we even meet Irons for the first time, we know he is sort of unhinged, secretive, and possibly sadistic or insane. We also know he was in the pocket of Umbrella and was specifically paid to guard their secret lab from an entry of unauthorized personnel. This memo also points to Irons as being responsible for destroying evidence of Umbrella's activities at both the Spencer Mansion and Raccoon City. This brilliant character building in RE2 shines here with Irons because we know so much about him before we even meet him. In one memo, we read about how the chief of RPD made the decision to relocate several weapon caches which are normally available to the police force, but during the outbreak they were unable to be as well armed as usual. The implication here is that Irons wanted to facilitate the deaths of everyone on the police force, and by extension of that, the civilians of Raccoon City. I have a theory of why he does this. We know from one other memo found in the STARS office that Chief Irons has a history of violent sexual assault, including 2 counts of grape he was charged with in college, but was never convicted. We also know Irons has a fascination with taxidermy, which we can observe in the adornment of animal heads circling his office. However, the point I'm building up to can be summarized by one image. Irons sitting alone in his office, surrounded by the many dead animals he's kept as trophies, and on his desk, the dead and naked young woman, all to himself. If you are still wondering where I'm going with this, my interpretation of Irons is that he was using the Raccoon City outbreak as a tool to hunt the prey he always wanted to, humans. In particular, attractive young women. There is no indication that he is cannibalistic, only that he is violent, sadistic, and has a history of violent sexual assault. I think he only wanted the rest of the police force dead because they were obstacles between him and his deranged, violent, and selfish desires. He likely delights in killing innocent people for fun or sexual gratification, and given the fact that he has his own private torture chamber hidden beneath his office, I think that's pretty obvious. He may even like to hunt others. It's possible he was collecting the mayor's daughter's corpse to experiment with some horrific type of human taxidermy. Part of the horror of Chief Irons isn't what we don't know about him, what he planned to do with the mayor's daughter, Sherry, or even Claire for that matter. Suffice it to say, I think Irons is a violent and disturbed individual who has absolutely no redeeming qualities, and I could not wait for him to die. Ada Wong. She is first mentioned during a memorable puzzle in Resident Evil 1, her name being part of a puzzle needed to hack a terminal in the Spencer Mansion secret Umbrella lab. John, who was also mentioned in this puzzle, turns out to be who Ada says is her boyfriend who went missing. Now, I know a lot of this has been changed and rewritten by Capcom, but this video is on Resident Evil 2 1998. When Ada and Leon first meet in the RPD underground facility, she uses a cover story saying she's searching for John, and Leon, being the green rookie, blindly believes her and protects her at all costs. What else to say about Ada? It's no surprise of her status as such a popular character in this franchise. Ada is a combat-hardened professional with a past that is barely hinted at or explored. Although her cool, mysterious persona would be greatly expanded in future works, she still embodies a certain mystique that I think intrigues the players as much as Leon. As we discover, she is after the G-Virus sample for unknown reasons, no affiliation with some mysterious employer, and no real clear motivation for obtaining the virus other than to sell to the highest bidder. There's a great contrast between Leon and Claire's probable moral absolutism to Ada, who is clearly not only willing to use anyone to complete the job, but is likely enabling global BOW terrorism. Because RE2 Classic only develops the characters so much, the rest of our interpretation of Ada, absent the auxiliary works, would come from speculation. What is her motivation? Is it money, defiance, love? Who was Dr. John Clemens? I think a Resident Evil title where Ada is the sole protagonist would be interesting. What led her to become a sort of mercenary for hire? Because I doubt money is her primary motivation. Part of me speculates that she faced some sort of crisis with a loved one in her life that led her to abandon herself in pursuit of power, money, what have you. The scene, at least in Remake, where Ada could shoot Leon, but doesn't, I think leaves some opportunity for theory crafting about Ada's past. Claire Redfield. Claire is actually one of my favorite characters, not necessarily because she's terribly complex or fascinating. I just like seeing that angelic, motherly sort of presence in the world of Resident Evil. What to say about Claire? Because Claire is more than just Sherry's personal bodyguard, isn't she? It's possible that being the younger sister of Chris Redfield has resulted in her having some competency with firearms and combat. I could see Chris and Claire as kids, Chris being the stronger, protective older brother, but not exactly coddling his little sister either. Because when the going gets tough, Claire can be a serious headache with that grenade launcher. Claire is a helpful and courageous protagonist, practically the female counterpart to Leon, as they are presented in Resident Evil 2. It's interesting to see her reactions to Chief Irons. His depravity and cruelty is greatly contrasted to her loving and nurturing nature. Claire is great with kids, Chief Irons, not so much. We see in Claire someone who will put her life on the line to protect others, echoing that saintly protagonist thing again, someone of virtue. However, we also see how she takes a particular interest in Sherry, whose own mother is too focused on the big picture and the implications of the G-Virus to be there for her. It is my belief that Sherry would certainly have died if it weren't for Claire. Not only that, Sherry would have died in the shadow of her parents' work, indeed because of it, but because Claire is someone who cares enough for others, Sherry didn't have to experience that. That is Claire. Sherry Birkin. Sherry is the daughter of Umbrella scientists William and Annette Birkin. For whatever reason, during the events of Resident Evil 2, she is found wandering the underground facility beneath the police station. Come to think of it, of course she was. Both her parents have been practically living in the lab, and the rest of Raccoon City is a disaster. Where else would a child want to be during such a catastrophe, except near their parents? Some visual storytelling in the design of multiple areas of RE2 tell a story of a terrified Sherry crawling under passages, ventilation shafts, and literal holes in the ground to barely escape the clutches of zombies, lickers, and rabid, infected Dobermans. Meanwhile, she's being chased by her mutated father, who wants to implant her with an embryo because they share DNA, which just sounds disturbing. Sherry is the only perspective of a child we get in Resident Evil 2, and as such we are presented with a terrified, shy, and sometimes brave little girl. The locket she carries with her bears significance, as it contains a photo of Sherry and her parents, William and Annette, but also contain an important sample of the G-Virus. We see Claire realize Mr. X is after it, and she in kind throws it in a vat of lava which Mr. X dives in after. As some of you may know, Sherry goes on to become a competent, combat-oriented special agent for the US government, as seen in Resident Evil 6. It's no doubt that her quick upbringing because of the events of the Raccoon City outbreak contributed to this. T00, or Mr. X. I don't believe there is any indication, in-game or otherwise, for the moniker Mr. X, as he is simply referred to as the Tyrant, a creation of Shinji Mikami, who is one of, if not the most important game developer in survival horror history. Mr. X, while he, or it, provided us with several great jump scares and terrifying memorable moments, this was still the Nemesis prototype. Likely due to lack of technological programming availability, Mr. X was unable to truly stalk the player in an unscripted manner. However, what we did end up with was something completely new, which was an indestructible, terrifying threat to the player. Whenever Mr. X shows up, it's often in situations where Claire or Leon are in a narrow hallway or room, where getting around him is difficult to do without taking a massive punch to the stomach first. If you are like many players going in blind for the first time, you might even think emptying that precious ammo into him is a good idea, but he will not die. He may take a knee, giving you time to get the hell out of there, but otherwise he is a relentless force of destruction that will not stop his hunt until he can crush his prey into a mound of mutilated bones and flesh. Mr. X is indeed a BOW, one of several sent by Umbrella in response to the Raccoon City outbreak for a variety of reasons. Mr. X, or T00, was sent to obtain the G-Virus sample from Sherry's locket and probably to eliminate all survivors as well. All else that is known from T00 is that he is a product of Umbrella's masterful utilization of the progenitor virus, a weapon so powerful, so unyielding, and apparently able to be biologically programmed to fulfill specific tasks, an invaluable asset to the Umbrella Corporation and an unbelievable threat to the survivors of Raccoon City. William Birkin. As you should know by now, William is the creator of the G-Virus, a leading Umbrella scientist who himself is a master of virology, who, along with Umbrella, is responsible for the terror in the city. Of course, the outbreak in Raccoon City was not the intention of Umbrella, but because of a dispute between William and Umbrella regarding the transfer of the G-Virus sample, several events took place which we will cover later that ignited the eventual destruction of Raccoon City. We learn much more about William in supplemental Resident Evil works, but in this game, we really only get a silhouette of Birkin and his conflict. The story employs an aspect of horror I really enjoy, which is the blending of science and horror. Here we have a brilliant scientist tasked with improving the inferior T-Virus, and in his years of patient and dedicated experimentation and scientific analysis has done so with the G-Virus. Ultimately, he has developed a sort of god complex, in awe of his own success and devotion. His interactions with Umbrella and Chief Irons, as we learn in notes left around RPD, indicate a man who now views anyone standing in his way as small, insignificant aggravations, errors in an otherwise flawless mathematical equation. He often berates Chief Irons for his failures in security for the underground lab, given the suspicion directed at him from Umbrella HQ. It seems like William's pride as a man is tied to his creation and control of the G-Virus. Thanks to supplemental material, we learn Birkin was less interested in using the G-Virus as a weapon, and more so interested in the implications for rapid human evolution, perhaps even immortality. There is a compatibility between characters William Birkin and Albert Wesker that we will explore later in a video for Resident Evil 0. As Birkin continues to maintain radio silence from his superiors at Umbrella HQ, he is greeted with Umbrella Special Forces, led by Special Operative Hunk, and is shot to death. The vials crushed on the floor containing G-Virus samples were consumed by rats, which started the entire outbreak of Raccoon City. Whether infecting the entire city using this method was his plan or not remains a debated topic in Resident Evil fandom, but I personally don't know and will maybe change my answer later as I learn more about him in other works. At some point, William infects himself with the G-Virus in an effort to prevent Umbrella from obtaining his precious G. I'm not sure if he has any idea the amount of danger he will be putting his family in once he is infected and his cognition has reduced to that of a rat, but I do find it ironic that this brilliant scientist makes such an uncalculated decision in his dying moments. However, perhaps his warped utilitarian ideal fails to view the safety of his wife and child, or the rest of Raccoon City for that matter, as a priority. The final character we will be discussing is wife of William and mother of Sherry, Annette Birkin. Like William, Annette is another leading virologist for Umbrella. Unfortunately, the canon of Resident Evil can be a very confusing web of contradictions, from the 20 or 30 plus games and counting, to the various optional scenarios with differing accounts of story. This is why I like to analyze the game before me in a vacuum, independent of the various installments that may all conflict with one another. What we see in Annette is a woman who seems at first glance as obsessed with G-Virus as her husband, and she is as enthralled by the magnitude of their success as William, and she is likewise in a trance of sorts because of it, unable or unwilling to be a caring and protective mother to Sherry. And from at least what we are given in RE2, that's the extent of it. Despite varying accounts and updated canonical events, one thing that remains true about Annette is that she plays a major role in the Raccoon City disaster, and her devotion to her work are what ultimately, albeit unintentionally, ruin hundreds of thousands of lives. Annette has an arc, albeit a short one. As she becomes aware that William has infected their daughter with the G-Virus, she gives Claire the means of vaccinating her as she dies, reeling from her wounds of her now consciously dead husband. As William has evolved to the monstrosity that he is, Annette simply dies knowing that she saved her daughter, and unfortunately, ended countless other lives in the pursuit of greatness. In this section, I will briefly cover the events of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil Remake. Though I will not be mentioning all major plot points, I will be discussing some in detail. If you haven't played these games, I strongly implore you to do so if you would like to avoid major spoilers. In Resident Evil 1, the story follows the STARS Alpha team as they investigate a series of mysterious cannibalistic murders within the Arklay Mountains region. Series veterans Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield investigate the Spencer Mansion, fighting their way through T-virus-infected zombies, hunters, crows, infected dogs, and giant snakes. Throughout the slow-burning mystery of Resident Evil, the remaining members of Alpha Team uncover that the Spencer Mansion was in actuality a research facility and hides a secret underground lab used by the pharmaceutical company Umbrella. It is here that Alpha Team discovers the Tyrant Virus, or the T-Virus, a highly contagious strain of the fictional progenitor virus with roots in West Africa, perhaps a real-world allusion to the Ebola virus. The T-Virus, a biological weapon fully capable of ending nations and even humanity, was secretly engineered by Umbrella with the purpose of creating biological organic weapons, or BOWs, to be sold in the black market. As our leading protagonists investigate the secret lab, we learn that there was an accident in the lab that led to the release of the T-Virus, which results in the infection of several Umbrella scientists and the research personnel, an event that would later become known as the Spencer Mansion Incident. As a side note, it is revealed in auxiliary works that the T-Virus was no accident, but this will be covered in a future video. The climax of Resident Evil involves the escape of Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Barry Burton, and Rebecca Chambers, the survival of series meta-antagonist Albert Wesker, and the destruction of the Spencer Mansion. When Umbrella is made aware of the destruction of the Spencer Mansion and the subsequent escape of STARS Team Alpha, measures are taken by Umbrella to contain the incident from public knowledge, which brings us to Resident Evil 2. The events of Resident Evil 2 and the Raccoon Police Department vary based on what order the player chooses the characters, Claire or Leon.
Name's Leon Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Mine's Claire Redfield.
I read somewhere that Capcom has gone on record stating that Claire's A scenario and Leon's B scenario are recognized officially as canon. Thus, I will describe the events appropriately. I'm not entirely sure if there even is an official canon, but for the sake of simplicity, let's just start here. We open with college student and younger sister of our previous hero in Resident Evil, Claire Redfield. On motorcycle, she is en route to Raccoon City in search for her brother Chris in response to the events of Resident Evil 1. Claire meets Leon at a gas station in Raccoon City, which has been infested with zombies. They quickly make their escape and make introductions with one another.
Hey, I'm Leon!
Before a truck comes in and almost crushes the both of them.
Jesus, titty fucking.
Escaping their deaths, they are separated by the wreckage and surrounded by massive flames and the citizens of Raccoon City who are now undead. They make their way to their RPD on their own. Once Claire arrives at the RPD, she is greeted by one of the only survivors, Officer Marvin Branagh, who has already been bitten and will soon turn. Marvin informs Claire of the creatures and threats roaming the police station, and in an act of selflessness, gives Claire an important keycard and subsequently forces her to leave the room and locks the door, as he is gravely aware he will not be conscious much longer and will soon be a threat.
Just go.
Claire explores the RPD, reading memos and articles mostly describing the perspective of the last survivors of the RPD disaster. These memos describe the activities of Police Chief Brian Irons, who not only is revealed to be in Umbrella's pocket, but seems to have relocated several of RPD's weapon stashes, a highly problematic and questionable decision regarding the safety of the police force.
Everyone's gonna die!
Chief Irons allows and enables Umbrella to operate in Raccoon City by hiding and destroying evidence, keeping unauthorized people out and away from their secret underground lab. Claire soon meets with a young girl, Sherry Birkin, who is frantically running from a grotesque, human-like monster who has been chasing her around RPD, and Claire vows to protect her. When Claire arrives at the STARS office, she finds notes regarding her brother, Chris Redfield, how he is continuing his fight against Umbrella by searching for their headquarters in Europe. She also finds a document mysteriously printing as she is leaving, indicating Chris was in contact with one Jack Hamilton of the United States Federal Police. The document illustrates their investigation of Brian Irons, how he was arrested for 2 counts of rape but was never convicted, how he was involved in the cover-up of the Spencer Mansion incident, and how he has received several large bribes from Umbrella. Meanwhile, Leon has his own introductions at RPD. Shortly after arriving, a cutscene shows Umbrella airlifting a tyrant into the RPD, the notorious Mr. X. Leon learns quickly that Mr. X is indestructible, thus forcing Leon to run for it. After finding his way to the underground facility / parking garage, Leon meets a mysterious and attractive woman named Ada Wong. She explains to Leon how she is searching for her boyfriend, an Umbrella researcher named John. Leon and Ada continue their search together and soon encounter jail cells used by the RPD, which are mostly empty or filled with dead bodies. However, in one cell, they encounter a reporter named Ben Bertolucci, who informs them of a way to access the sewers. He is killed shortly after by the monster who slashes Ben with its apparent claws. In the underground facility, at some point Leon and Ada get separated, and Ada has to investigate further on her own. She sees Sherry Birkin, but the young girl frantically runs away, not without dropping her pendant. Ada approaches the girl's pendant and wears it around her neck for the time being.
How cute. That little girl must have dropped this. I think I'll hold on to it for her.
Claire reaches Iron's office, which is adorned by taxidermized animals, trophies of the chief's hunting. Claire descends the secret elevator, which leads to a disturbing dark room that resembles a Renaissance torture chamber. The dungeon contains bones and skulls of several humans, and it becomes readily apparent that this is where Irons apparently tortured several police officers and civilians, indicated by the chains, scattered appendages, and a blood-stained restraining bed. Irons appears and is about to kill Claire when a parasitic-like embryo bursts out of his chest, splitting his clavicle in a crude vivisection, and Irons collapses to the ground, mortally wounded, and dies. Our two parties, Leon with Ada and Claire with Sherry, eventually descend further into the sewers of Raccoon City beneath the police station. Sherry gets separated from Claire after falling deeper into the sewers. We then get some rather significant background information here, as Claire encounters a survivor, virologist Annette Birkin. She explains to Claire that the monster that has been chasing Sherry is her husband, William Birkin, the mastermind behind the G-Virus. We learn here that the lab beneath RPD was infiltrated by Umbrella's special forces, and William was fatally shot during the altercation. However, just before William succumbs to his wounds, he injects himself with the G-Virus, thus turning into the monster that roams beneath the station. Finally, it's explained that because Sherry Birkin shares similar DNA with her father, the monster William has become has the goal of implanting her with his embryo, with Sherry being an optimal host for the G-Virus. Leon and Ada find Annette as well, and are in pursuit of her for answers. Annette fires shots at Ada, but Leon heroically dives in front of her, taking the bullets. Ada remains in pursuit of Annette, and when she reaches her, Annette recognizes her daughter's pendant around Ada's neck and attempts to retrieve it. After the two of them struggle and wrestle for the pendant, Ada overpowers her and Annette is thrown off the railing into the sewage of the police station. Once Sherry and Claire, and likewise Leon and Ada, reunite, both parties head to further down into the lab. Claire and Sherry descend into the lab via the cable car, but are suddenly attacked by William, who has evolved into a greater, more powerful form from the G's mutation cycle. She defeats him, and Claire gives Sherry her lucky pink jacket and consoles her. Later, Leon and Ada similarly descend to the lab and fight Birkin in a more evolved state. But Ada is seriously injured from William in the cable car. Leon brings Ada to a resting room to recover. Claire and Sherry hold a meaningful conversation in which Sherry opens up about her childhood, about how she's been alone for much of her life due to her parents' obsession with their work.
I grew up alone, but now that you're with me, I finally have someone to rely upon.
In an actually touching moment, Sherry tells Claire of her loneliness, how appreciative she is for her friendship and for looking out for her. Claire, being a truly caring person, vows to get the vaccine for Sherry. Leon and Claire explore the Umbrella Lab separately, coming across several horrific types of enemies, including advanced stage zombies, many lickers, a giant moth, and the plant creatures. Notably, the plant creatures, much like the lab zombies in Resident Evil 1, respawn after killing them or burning them seemingly. The persistent threat these plant creatures pose to the player give the lab a real sense of danger. Leon eventually encounters none other than Annette Birkin, and as she holds Leon at gunpoint, she reveals to him the truth about Ada Wong, how her relationship with John was purely a means of spying on Umbrella, and how she is employed by a secret organization intending to steal the G-Virus and subvert Umbrella. As she is about to shoot Leon, the tyrant appears in glorious timing and forces Annette to run. She later runs into Claire, where Claire informs her of her daughter's G-Virus infection.
Stop it! Sherry's in serious trouble. William implanted her with his embryos. There's no telling when they'll pupate. And if that happens, Sherry won't. What?
Claire encounters the mutated William Birkin yet again, and a panicked Annette attempts to approach him, but is instead mauled, shredded, and shoved against the wall, likely breaking and fracturing several bones. Claire approaches a near-death Annette, and in her final moments, Annette informs Claire of how to synthesize the antidote for Sherry, and to tell her she loves her and that she's sorry. Leon is cornered by Mr. X, but Ada shows up in time to distract Mr. X, but he wounds her and throws her against the wall before falling in a vat of lava. Leon and Ada share what seems to be their final moment. Leon tries to escape with Ada, but she instead insists he go on, and she confesses her love for him. They share a kiss, and Ada seemingly dies in his arms. Leon is forced to leave. As he's preparing the tram for escape, he has one last encounter with Mr. X, who has mutated into an even stronger, faster, and more powerful monster. Leon and Mr. X begin their final battle, and the clock is ticking. Leon is forced into a desperate battle with Mr. X, who is quickly overwhelming him with his speed and untethered brutality. Nevertheless, Leon bravely unloads on him with everything in his arsenal. Miraculously, as Leon is close to his demise, Ada appears, seemingly surviving her wounds from earlier, and throws Leon an RPG to deliver the final blow.
Game over. Game over.
Leon destroys Mr. X with the RPG and narrowly escapes his fate and boards the train with Sherry. Claire, having obtained the vaccine, boards the train, and the three of them, Leon, Claire, and Sherry, are reunited. As they gather themselves on the train, their only possibility for survival, an alarm goes off indicating a self-destruct sequence has now been activated, and Leon goes to the next car to investigate. Appearing in horrific fashion, with thousands of teeth and now the size of a small bus, William Birkin, who is now so far gone beyond recognition that he has now evolved into what can only be described as an abomination. Leon, similarly untethered, attacks Burton with everything in his arsenal, sending grenades, shotgun blasts, and more into the gaping maw of William Birkin. The top of the abomination shows a greatly distorted and hardly recognizable face of William Birkin, the stuff of nightmares, and the powers of science taken to its horrific final destination. Leon gives one last blast of his magnum, and the being that was once William Birkin begins to appear staggered and slowly begins to disintegrate into a puddle of empty, lifeless flesh. Leon enters the car with Sherry and Claire, and then perhaps the greatest escape sequence I've ever seen unfolds. Birkin's tentacles begin to puncture through the door, and Sherry retreats into the engineer's room. Leon and Claire both retreat, with Claire going under the train to hide from Birkin, and Leon goes topside. Leon reaches the room where Sherry is and tells her to press the red switch, and the train stops. The three survivors sprint out of the train tunnel, and the train, with Birkin on it, combusts in a massive explosion, and Birkin is finally destroyed for good. Leon, Claire, and Sherry walk off into the sunset surrounded by desert, and they vow to bring down Umbrella together.
Come on, time to leave.
Now? What's wrong? Is something following us?
We have to go. We don't have any time to waste.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
One notable difference about these older REs, in particular Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, is that it's likely because of the technological limitations of the time, we weren't able to have any dynamic or advanced lighting, or shadows to create a real dark world design. While Capcom would very successfully improve the lighting and darkness in Resident Evil 2 Remake, what we have in classic Resident Evil 2 is still a very dark and ominous backdrop for a video game. I would like to spend some time discussing things like the atmosphere, tone, level design, and visuals. In survival horror, creating a mysterious, unsettling, and ominous atmosphere is almost a requirement. The atmosphere in a video game is a combination of several things: music and sound design, art and level design, tone, environment. We open in Resident Evil 2 with our protagonist surrounded by zombies, burning vehicles, and a cluster maze of ruined cars and buildings. It is indeed dark, and the pre-rendered backgrounds here are effective in creating a sense of claustrophobia. I want to brag about the pixel work and art design of the backdrop here. The sense of darkness is created carefully here with the use of shading and darker colors on the buildings and dilapidated alleys. I have an appreciation for old graphics done well, pushing the conventions of the time to their limit. It's a beautiful thing to see. The streets of Raccoon City are done exceptionally well, giving the player a sense of scale while also creating a claustrophobic and logical environment with the abandoned cars blocking most routes. With broken glass, trash, and rubble in every corner of the screen, the backdrop of Raccoon City tells a story of panic and ruin. If I were to sum up the visual implications of these opening scenes, it just seems that the G-Virus swept through the city in a matter of hours. By the end of the first day, the city has gone through such a shockingly fast upheaval, and it is indicative by the sheer volume of destruction. It is Raccoon City interrupted. There is much to appreciate in Resident Evil 2's level design. After all, the level design in the remake is practically a love letter to the fans. There are some areas in the original's design that have risen to iconic areas, such as the RPD main hall, the save room conjoined with the dark room, the west hallway with the introduction of the liquor. These areas are perhaps iconic because they are tied with a feeling. The main hall is a place of reprieve from the hundreds of zombies in Raccoon City. The save room equally a place of reprieve and sanctuary from the claustrophobic encounters with the zombies just outside, or that first hallway associated with the palpable tension and dread, somehow knowing something awful was around the corner, indicated by the tense, unusual music that plays as we slowly turn the corner at the end. Greeted with this unbelievable looking monster, a full human brain exposed, along with the rest of his blood-red, bestial body, claws the size of hunting knives, and a tongue so powerful it can obliterate your chest in seconds. Music is a powerful device, but in Resident Evil 2, I think the atmospheric tracks at particular moments really do some heavy lifting for building that ominous tone. There are several tracks in the game that are less melodic and more so just eerie, dark waves of sound that support this feeling of darkness and mystery. It's wonderful to see this harmony in the presentation, the hallways and desks in disrepair, the undead roaming quietly in the many rooms, and the haunting music that immerses the player in the nightmare. A staple of Resident Evil and survival horror is the obtainment of various files and memos that tell a story or provide background information on the crisis at hand. In the case of Resident Evil 2, this is in the form of several memos left by the remaining survivors of RPD. Here we just receive small bits, vignettes, of the thoughts and feelings of those survivors, and from a design perspective, I thought this decision was a great way to 1. Prime the audience for what is possibly to come later, and 2. To add some flavor and lore to the characters we are to meet, mostly Chief Irons. This is an old game indeed. I'm 33. This game came out when I was like 8 years old. So the insane improvements we've had in quality and fidelity since then are obvious. However, I like to imagine this game as if the year is currently 1999. Backstreet Boys about to drop Millennium. Hell, the Twin Towers were still a thing. I had a Game Boy Color. What did this game mean in 1999? I think this is a game that is beloved for a reason. This game was absolutely an enormous commercial success and was celebrated by many. Resident Evil, with its fixed camera angles and the requisite use of tank controls, creates a feeling of disarray and lopsidedness on its own. The very nature of this control scheme, apart from it being odd and unnatural, actively supports the feeling of unease and dread that is intended by the developers. The point of survival horror, in my opinion, is to make the player feel a sense of desperate hopelessness, with perhaps just the possibility for survival. I think the classic Resident Evils provide that, even if there is almost universal frustration attributed to this control scheme. It is vintage, a relic at this point, to control a player character in this fashion. However, it also adds a uniqueness to classic Resident Evil and is partly responsible for its charm. Nevertheless, this will be an absolute hurdle for not just new players, but especially players new to retro gaming. I can't even say that I prefer tank controls, more so I tolerate them as they contribute to pulling me into the frantic hopelessness that is Resident Evil. I should mention that, of the 3 classic Resident Evil titles I've played thus far, I think this one is by far the easiest one to beat. The game provides you with too much ammunition and resources for me to consider this a desperate survival horror experience. This is surely to be the case with experienced survival horror fanatics, although I'm sure some veterans struggled with this game at some points. Compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, where lickers were sure to end you quickly, lickers can be taken out in this game with a shotgun blast or two. Unfortunately, there are harder difficulty options, but they are limited to the Dreamcast and PC ports of this game. I should talk more specifically about the gameplay, the core loop, and experience of this immersive retro title. In Resident Evil, you have some things you might expect from a horror game. Pistols, machine guns, launchers, knives, all the goodies. And you also have some methods of healing, your health spray, and the herb mixing mechanic introduced in Resident Evil 1. Herb mixing is a mechanic that works very well with the inventory management part of survival horror, presenting you with choices. You could mix a green and red herb and get a full heal, or maybe you need to make space to pick up a new key item, so you are better off consuming just one green herb for a less than sufficient heal. Knowing that health, and all other resources for that matter, are a non-renewable resource in the world of Resident Evil, you may opt to only use health when on the brink of death. However, you may be encountering 2 lickers in the next room, so you think healing now is better to avoid almost certain death. Healing items are not the only element of the decision-making and strategy planning nature of survival horror. Deciding to fight or flight is typically a constant question in the player's mind as they investigate the various dilapidated hallways and offices of the RPD. While my normal playthrough of Resident Evil 2 enabled me to kill almost everything, it's clear, at least to me, that they ramped up this question tenfold in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, where it really is apparent that fighting is not always or rarely the best option. The main reason I feel for killing zombies, other than survival, is for mere exploration. We often must decide if this is a room we will be returning to a lot. As the odds of getting grabbed and overwhelmed by zombies are higher, the more we need to run through a narrow hallway again. If you are like me at all, you want to get stocked up, loaded up, and find as many free items lying around as you can. Especially on a first playthrough, where you really don't know who and what you are up against. You want to be ready to rock and roll if you need to. But is the risk worth the reward? The combat itself can be surprisingly exciting at times for such an old school game. I believe this comes from the stress factor that while aiming your pistol and firing off rounds at one zombie, there is another flesh-eating buddy of his approaching you slowly, yet menacingly, right at your feet about to grab your legs. The idea here being strategizing which enemy to attack first, who is the most direct threat at the present moment, and making all sorts of calculated decisions like this by the seat of your pants. You have this combat mechanic prevalent in even the more recent survival horror games, yet here we have it in 1998. Another example would be in Dead Space, where you have one necromorph crawling at you from the ground who is closer to you, and another charging at you. Do you finish off the threat on the ground, or try to cut off the charger's limbs? Moments like these are part of what makes survival horror games such an intense and unique experience. Survival horror is often punishing. Enemies hit like a truck. You often don't survive more than a few bad blows. In Resident Evil 2, zombies aren't too threatening to the experienced survival horror geek. No crimson heads, and no charging zombies as seen in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. They're just kinda slow. As long as you can finagle your way around tank controls, you should be able to bring them down. Pistol or shotgun, easy work. You can also knife them, but it'll take you for goddamn ever to kill them like that. As for some of the other varieties, that being lickers, zombie dogs, giant spiders, and more, there are plenty of enemies included to kick your ass. One mention would be those plant creatures in the lab again. I think they respawn after you kill them, which is always a major bummer, considering how precious ammunition usually is. Generally though, this game is pretty damn easy, and I think that's fine. It obviously hasn't stopped it from being such a significant video game. The only thing I have left to say about the gameplay is about the user interface and the puzzles/exploration aspects of the game. The UI is typically one of my favorite parts about Resident Evil games. No, I'm not talking about inventory management frustration. I mean, for whatever reason, I love having a menu to navigate in video games. To view inventory, maps, files, data. Taking a break from the combat and exploration to pause, contemplate, and think. In the case of Resident Evil 2 and several others in the franchise, entering the inventory menu takes over the entire screen, acting as a fourth wall middle ground between the player and the game. While I understand this is often considered breaking immersion, it's actually a preference of mine. Over the years of loving survival horror, I've often found myself paused in-game for hours trying to solve puzzles, reading through all the files and clues I've picked up to that point without looking on the internet. Except you, Silent Hill 3. There are several functions to the user interface, aside from equipping weapons and using items on puzzle spots. One is the ability to combine items. Since there is no reload button in Resident Evil 2, combine can be used to reload your weapon in the middle of combat, which is very helpful. Here, we can also combine herbs and also inspect various key items, reread files, and view our map. All of these features are very important for the Resident Evil experience. They are used to good effect. One nice touch was the map having color-coded symbols for the doors, representing the key you must use. The puzzles were actually a bit of a downgrade from Resident Evil 1, and just like super easy and kinda just there. The only one that I kinda liked was the library one, but even that was pretty much a short memorizing game. In short, puzzles are not the strongest part of Resident Evil 2, but I still have a desire to replay it, especially hard mode via the PC version if I can manage to get my hands on it. The point is, the most fulfilling gameplay moments I've had with survival horror, or any game for that matter, is when there is a real degree of challenge and even some failure. There were a few moments I can mention that felt good, and that would be the boss fights. The Birkin and Mr. X fights were so damn good. Music was absolutely on point, and as Birkin evolved to his varied, more powerful forms, the music grew in intensity. Is it the best video game music on par with Final Fantasy? No, not even close. But I'll say Capcom has its moments with boss fight music. One of my favorite being the fight with Ramon Salazar over in Resident Evil 4 Remake. The music in Resident Evil 2 excels greatly at the tense, dark, atmospheric, almost mysterious music, and the music for boss fights is, in my opinion, exciting, intense, and sometimes having an operatic tone. The boss fights in most Resident Evil games are incredibly tense, especially on a first playthrough. There is something so cathartic about expelling all those scarce grenade rounds or magnum bullets at that gory, twisted mass of pulsating flesh before you as you hope and struggle to survive. Up until this point, you've probably learned that in Resident Evil, one must be careful with how they utilize their precious ammunition. But when the moment comes and you are to face William Birkin yet again, you know the time has come. So you fire away with everything at your disposal, because you know it's do or die. As we approach the end, I just want to thank you deeply for taking the time to watch my humble video. Survival horror is something that is still sort of niche, relatively speaking, and so anyone who shares this deep love for the genre as much as I do, I feel a sort of kinship with. If you are interested in joining our small but growing community on Twitch, we would certainly be very happy to have you. Just check the description below. The intention of the channel is to review video games, provide some entertainment, but mostly just talk shit and bond over the beloved medium of video games. If you would like to stay up to date on videos I release in the future, then please consider subscribing. Again, thank you very much for watching. I am Donberry.